You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
Hey, Los Angeles, what's going on? Welcome to the LA Football Show here on the LA Football Network and on the mightier 1090 ESPN Radio. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm your co-host, Ryan Dowder, joined as always by the madman, Jamal Madney. We've got a great show for you on of LA Football Talk. If you're on podcast platform, this is your Chargers edition of the LA Football Show as we get into this division or wild card playoff matchup between the Chargers and the Jaguars. Staley versus Peterson, Herbert versus the great Trevor Lawrence. So it should be a lot of fun as we get into all of it. Show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag today. Use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. Gets a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline's legit. Jamal, this is random, but are you a big stand-up guy, like stand-up comedian guy?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Have you heard of Andrew Schultz?
I've heard the name. I'm more of like a Hassan Minhaj, Seinfeld, Russell Peters, that type of guy.
Yeah. All great. So Schultz is, I don't know if I say new. I'm sure he's been doing comedy for a long, long time, but he's newly gotten famous, and his special came out. I'll make this quick. Long story short, he had a special coming out. He didn't like, I can't remember what network it was actually getting released on. He didn't like what they were doing with it. Like they were editing certain stuff out. So he bought it back from them, bet on himself, bought it back from them, released it on his own like Patreon platform, and got BetOnline was one of his big sponsors that kind of paid him to do that. So he did like 3 ad spots throughout the special. I just watched it last night. That's why I'm bringing it up, which it's a phenomenal special. I think he's hilarious, but that was funny that BetOnline sponsored this giant comedian self special. So they're our sponsor as well. And you can bet on your Chargers. I bet on them just a few weeks ago, 22-1 at the time. They've obviously dropped by a little bit now that the playoffs are set, but I'm sure you can still win some money as a 5 seed and barely favored over the Jags. So betonline.ag, promo code BELIEVE. So my friend Jamal, before we get into it, how are you? How is the week going as we prepare for, playoffs this weekend? Finally.
Unbelievable, Ryan. I'm excited. It's been a really interesting week, a fun week, and hard to believe that now we're in the playoffs and we got games Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Can't wait to get into it. So much going on in LA on the college side with all the movement in the portal, and we got everything going on with the Chargers headlining our NFL material. So just can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's crazy. Saturday, Sunday, and Monday for playoffs. But hey, that's good for us, the viewer, as we do that. So Saturday, obviously hoping to, the game 5:15 kickoff for our Chargers. I'm still kind of figuring out. I know some of the, the diehard Bolt Club, they do stuff all over SoCal. So I may try to find a spot where they are at and go say what up. So anyone out there listening, any diehard Bolt Club members, drop us where you guys are going to be. You can text us. Text bolts to 31032, or you can hit us up on Twitter, Ryan Dyer to LAFB or LAFB Jams. Because I think that's what I want to do. I want to go hang out with a bunch of Chargers fans and watch this game, as it's going to be a good one. So before we really dive into it, we got to talk Staley. Obviously, he's been a hot topic per usual among not just the fan base, but the media. We got to talk Herbert, Lawrence, but just how is your initial feelings for this game? We out of all the playoff teams in the AFC, obviously, I thought this was the best matchup, considering it wasn't Burrow and the Bengals. It wasn't Allen and the Bills. It wasn't Mahomes and the Chiefs. But this is a trending team that also has, won, 5 or 6 straight. They were like 3-8 at one point, finished the season 9-8. And so they're definitely trending like the Chargers in a very positive direction. So just your initial thoughts before we kind of go more granular.
Yeah, Ryan, it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because when you zoom out and look at it from kind of the macro level, 30,000 foot level, you're like, oh, cash, money. This is the matchup we wanted. We avoid Mahomes. We avoid Allen. We avoid Burrow. We get this game on our terms. We're the more talented team. And this really, even though we're on the road because of the way things are done in terms of divisional seedings, this really feels like the game we wanted and a relatively clearer path to victory. And then when you sort of zoom in, you double click, you go into the micro, you go into the details, you're like, well, hold on. They also have a young quarterback who's playing the best ball of his career, who's playing with so much confidence, so much momentum. They went from 4-8, like you mentioned, to 9-8, 5 games in a row, and were essentially the Jaguars have basically been in the playoffs since Thanksgiving, essentially, because they've had to basically win every game just to get here. And then when you look at, they've got a Super Bowl champion coach in Doug Peterson, who's played in so many big games. They've got a young, hungry defense led by the plethora of top picks that they've had over the years that are athletic, that are fast, that go sideline to sideline. They were at home with their raucous crowd. So all of a sudden, this game that initially felt like there was a clear path, when you really look at it, you're like, wow, this is going to be a very challenging game. And the last piece is the Chargers have only beaten one team with a greater than 500 record this year, and that was the Dolphins at home. So this is the first time they're going to attempt to win a greater than 500 game on the road. So for all of those reasons, this is going to be a dogfight when we really get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a tough game. Both teams trending. It's unfortunate the way the Chargers season ended, because it was kind of, as we talked about last episode, I know Stars didn't play the whole game, but there was so much negative connotations going into it. And obviously Mike Williams gets a little banged up, so they don't go into the playoffs, which is much positive momentum as they had the week prior. But they're professional. I think they'll get it going. But Jacksonville going in with all the swagger after coming back, like you just mentioned, and winning the division in the final game against Tennessee. So, but two trending teams, two very similar teams in the fact that they're young, they're hungry. I wouldn't call Doug Peterson a young new coach, considering he's been there, done that, won a Super Bowl with Philly, but first time coach with the Jags. And obviously Staley's still a very young, he's just second year head coach. So here's what I want to do, Jamal, before we kind of, instead of just like a standard preview and talking like what we like and what we don't like, I kind of want to compare positions and players on each side. And I've seen some segments, and a lot, obviously the big talk is Lawrence versus Herbert. Like, who's better? Who would you rather have? And everyone, obviously both fans stand for theirs guys, but then kind of the rest is kind of split almost, I feel like. And so I want to get into, and we're not going to do every position, but into a few, and kind of that can give us a little bit, obviously it's a team game, you got to put it all together, but that can give us kind of a good feel preview wise of what this matchup looks like going into it. So defensively, Jamal, I mean, on paper and schematically, outside of probably the one guy with the one position I'm going to mention, the Chargers, I think across the board have more talent on defense, even with some of the injuries they have. But, getting Joey Bosa back, having Derwin James healthy, having the guys on the outside that they do have, I think overall they have arguably more talent up and down. Now, you can throw one to me if I don't mention it, but I'm just telling you I'm only going to do one on defense. If you want to do one to me, let's do it. But the one I'm going to ask you, and this is kind of like, who would you rather have, or who's better, however you want to phrase it. So you have, with Jacksonville, the rookie, Devin Lloyd, 115 tackles this year. Obviously, we know the career he had at Utah, being in the Pac-12, covered him extensively, because USC and UCLA play Utah, and just having a great rookie campaign. And then you look at, maybe not quite as much statistically, but you look at Drue Tranquil and the Chargers, who I honestly believe, including Derwin James, this year, Drue Tranquil has been the best defensive player for this Chargers team, in the fact of his leadership, just the momentum swings, the passion he plays with, but then just being kind of reliable and overall being one of the healthiest he's been in his career. And he does have 146 tackles this year. So it's statistically, total tackle wise, 95 solo, having a very good statistical season too. So based on this year, who's better? Who would you rather have, Devin Lloyd or Drue Tranquil?
Ryan, it's a really interesting question, because I think you actually secretly asked me two different questions inside that question, where there's the question of who's better, and then there's the question of who would you rather have in this particular game. I think at this stage in their careers, Tranquil is better. And I think that production has sort of revealed itself over the course of this year. And you could make the argument that Tranquil has been the most consistent player, not just defensive player, but player for the Chargers all season. However, if you ask me who I would rather have in this game, I probably go Devin Lloyd. And here's why. Because I think Lloyd's skill sets And his frame, the fact that he's 6'5", he can run like a deer. He's sideline to sideline. He's explosive in the tackle game, but he's also a guy who was able to make interceptions from the linebacker spot at Utah and really has flashed that athleticism this year. When you look at a Devin Lloyd, he is almost the ideal linebacker matchup for an Austin Ekeler out of the backfield in that pass game. And when you look at how much the Chargers rely on Ekeler in the pass game, really that other linchpin besides Keenan Allen, and you put a guy like Lloyd on Ekeler in various situations, I have to go there in terms of that matchup advantage Jaguars, that they have someone so talented, so athletic to be able to match up quite well with an element of the Chargers offense that they are so reliant on. So Tranquil is the better player, but in this particular matchup, I would rather have a Devin Lloyd being matched up on an Austin Ekeler given his usage rate as a receiver.
Yeah, it's a great point. And let me just throw this name at you too, without putting you on the spot. But those are the two I picked because I feel like in terms of what they do for the team, it's kind of more similar. But Jacksonville actually has a different linebacker that's leading in terms of tackles and kind of the leader in that room. Obviously, a more veteran presence, same age as Tranquil. And I'm probably going to butcher his name, but Forsade Olawukun, 128 solo tackles, 184 total tackles. So here's a guy that's just a magnet to the football. Now, I think that the style is a little different there, but I mean, when you break down just this linebacking core in general for Jacksonville, a very strong linebacking core. When you look at the Chargers, who have Drue Tranquil, who's great, Kenneth Murray has certainly improved, but I definitely wouldn't take those two versus those two if we're going 2v2, right?
No question about it, Ryan. And I think where the Jaguars, we talked about this at the start of the year, week 3, week 4, and I think it's only been amplified since then. This Jaguars front seven is for real. And they've done an outstanding job of drafting studs at the collegiate level that have now translated their game of the pros. I mean, drafting the kids out of Georgia, the kids out of Utah, all of these programs that really produce great linemen and linebackers. And now you're starting to see that on the field. They're fast, they're young, they're nasty, they're physical, they're dynamic. The Chargers are going to have their hands full, particularly in the box with that front seven.
Yeah, it's going to be up to Joe Lombardi, which this will be his biggest test since he's joined the Chargers, obviously first playoff game. And how do you schematically draw it up to free stuff up from those linebackers? Because it's going to be tough sledding running the football between the tackles with those two, headhunters that just have a nose for the football and nose for running backs. I mean, you don't see often when you have a pair of linebackers, each with, 150 or 115 plus total tackles, 300 almost combined between the two of them. So obviously they are always around the ball. And what is Lombardi and company going to do to free up Ekeler, to free up Kelly, to free up some of the end around game to get stuff moving and not force Herbert to drop back 50 times and face this pass rush? Because like you mentioned, the front seven in general is very good with Josh Allen coming off the edge. And obviously Trayvon Walker, the number 1 overall pick, who I wouldn't necessarily call a ferocious pass rusher, but certainly can rush the quarterback with 3.5 or 4 sacks total so far in the season. So definitely that will be the big thing to watch, because if they can get past that, I think they can do good things against the secondary. And that's what we'll have to see. So moving to the offense, Jamal, unless there's anyone else on defense you want to mention or ask. Moving to the offense. No, and this is no disrespect, but we won't go offensive line. I love the offensive line, but we'll keep it to skill positions. So we'll do a cop out. Receivers, I'm going 3v3. So you got Jacksonville, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Marvin Jones Jr., Chargers, considering all three are healthy, hopefully, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Joshua Palmer. Who's better? Who you taking?
Ryan, this is the unit where there is the greatest gap in advantage for the Chargers, I would argue. Even more than the gap at quarterback, and that may be a loaded statement, I think the gap in terms of receiver, this is where the Chargers can exploit their greatest advantage. And I think the game is going to come down to that cat and mouse that you just alluded to. Are the Chargers going to be able to keep the Chargers in the cage? Are they going to be able to shut down the run? Are they going to be able to take Ekeler out of the passing game? Are they going to be able to rush Herbert off of his spots and off of his progressions? If they can, they're going to be very successful in this game with this crowd noise, with the ability to control the ball and the clock on the other side. And Doug Peterson's a master of that. If they are not able to do that, they're really going to get burned on the back end with these amazing Chargers receivers. And Keenan Allen is finally starting to get into form. He's looking like that Pro Bowler, all-pro type of talent that we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years. And now Mike Williams, hopefully, knock on wood, he's healthy. We don't know what percentage of Mike Williams we're going to get, but even if we can get a 70+% version of Mike Williams, that combined with Josh Palmer, who's shown such flashes of brilliance over the course of this season with those first 2 guys being injured, I think it's abundantly clear to me that the Chargers trio is much more significant than the Jaguars trio. I think Christian Kirk, though Ryan is having an exceptional year, we all sort of chuckled at that contract that he got in the offseason from the Jaguars. And we said, here we go again, the Jaguars being the Jaguars. Is Christian Kirk just the Urban Meyer of wide receivers? And he's definitely proven the country and NFL fandom very, very differently with his performance this year. But beyond Kirk, I just don't see the depth of talent that the Chargers have. This is the Chargers' greatest advantage. And if the Chargers are able to prevail Saturday night, it will be because at least one of those guys got 100 yards, and most likely all 3 of those guys got more than 50 yards.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's definitely leans towards the Chargers. I would say even if, and he's not, I don't think he's going to, but even if Mike Williams is out, as long as you have a healthy Keenan and Josh Palmer, I still like that unit. Now, Christian Kirk, you mentioned it, phenomenal season, 1,100 yards. So, I mean, he at least is playing to his contract, and he's had a rebirth here in Jacksonville. So you love to see that. I think he's a good kid, and it's good to see, him being drafted out of, I think it was Texas A&M, with so much potential down in Arizona. Now we're seeing that in Jacksonville. And Zay Jones, he's a guy I love. I think he was out of Eastern Carolina. Loved him when he got drafted by Buffalo. Just never really came to fruition. So it's kind of, and Marvin Jones Jr. out of Detroit. Like, this is like a rebirth for these guys down here with Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence. So definitely a formidable unit, but definitely lean the Chargers. So let's go to running back. Travis Etienne missed his entire rookie year at Clemson. Uber talented, can do it all. Austin Ekeler, similar, obviously, do it all. They're very similar backs in the fact they're not super big, but they can kill you in the pass game or the run game. Who's better right now? Who do you like in this game?
Ooh, this one's a tough one, Ryan. I think that right now still Ekeler is better, but I think in a one-game scenario, I think the ceiling on Etienne is higher at this stage in their respective careers. And so Etienne has that burst. I know Ekeler had the huge run against the Rams where he saw that hole beautifully and went 74 yards, but I don't see enough pop from Ekeler in the ground game. Now getting closer, he's 26, 27 years old. He's getting closer to 30 than he is to 20. That usually is sort of the fall off period for the running backs. I think Eckler's had a phenomenal year, but a lot of it has been through the air, receiving touchdowns and so forth, and being kind of that red zone factor. I actually am going to go Etienne here, Ryan. I just think the explosiveness is there. And oftentimes in these playoff games, it's very hard to consistently put drives together, especially with 2 young teams in a wild card scenario. Inevitably, a game is decided by one big play or 2. And I could see Etienne be a guy that has one of those big plays. So reluctantly, I'm going Etienne.
Yeah, it's hard because I love Ekeler and I still think he's great and he's so important and vital to this team. But at this moment, I mean, I think I'd lean Etienne as well. I mean, he had almost 200 yards more rushing, over 1,100, almost 1,200 yards rushing on the ground. I would say Eckler's more consistent in the passing game. Like, you're basically guaranteed 30 to 40 yards receiving every single game. Etienne has that kind of up and down where he gets 51 games, 0 another game, 20 another game. But I just think the youth and the burst that Etienne has gives him a slight edge, but it's very close. Obviously, both these guys are great running backs and very important to this team and will have very big roles in this game if either's team hopes to win. All right, 2 left in this scenario. Let's go to the quarterbacks. Very similar stats this year, Jamal. Justin Herbert about 600 yards more passing. They had the exact same touchdowns at 25. Passer rating was 2-point difference. The interceptions, Herbert had 10. Trevor Lawrence had 8. Trevor Lawrence had 5 rushing touchdowns. Herbert had no rushing touchdowns. I know how I feel, but your thoughts on these QB comparison?
Ryan, I think it's Herbert right now, and I think it's pretty clear. I wouldn't say it's Herbert in a landslide, but it's Herbert by a comfortable margin. I think you and I both think he's somewhere between top 4 and top 7. And let's not forget, Trevor Lawrence, the jury was still out until about 6 weeks ago. He's gotten really hot the last 6 weeks. We've talked about it. He's been one of, if not the best quarterback in the NFL the last 6 weeks, throwing outside the hash marks, and that's really led to his success. But overall body of work, they both have absolute cannons for right arms. They're both big kids. They're both mobile enough with the feet to sort of extend plays. But I just think Herbert can dissect a defense at this stage in their careers in more variety of ways with that arm. He can go long. He can throw those deep 20-yard sideline throws. He can kill you with, laser beams up the middle. There's just a consistency and a variety to his throws, his arm angles that Lawrence doesn't have. And for me, it's clear that it's Justin Herbert.
Yeah, I don't know if there's two other quarterbacks in football that are as similar and comparable than these two guys. I mean, basically the exact same size.
Yeah.
Very similar arm talent. I would lean Herbert, but it's similar. Similar athletic ability. Neither guys are running quarterbacks, but they can escape and be mobile if necessary. Both similar demeanors and personalities, kind of quieter, love the game, but they're not like rah-rah in your face. Both have majestic flowing hair. Like, it's unreal how similar these two guys are. But yes, I would lean Herbert absolutely right now. Statistically, very, very similar. But if you just watch the guys play, and I know the eye test is one of those dumb characteristics that gets thrown around, but I think you can just see a little bit more consistency and a little bit more of the upper echelon skill set right now from Herbert. I think obviously Trevor Lawrence can get there, especially with his pedigree coming out of college. But I would definitely lean Herbert. I think each fan base is going to stand for their guy. I think nationally it's fairly split. I think overall we can agree both are very close, but realistically, anyone that really wants to be honest with themselves, I think you got to go Herbert. Also, the guy played half the season on cracked ribs, so let's give the guy some credit there as well. So, last one now. The two coaches. Brandon Staley, the defensive guru, obviously has had some questionable game management or just decision-making. Overall, this team's still, 10-7 in the playoffs, 5 seed. Doug Peterson, Super Bowl winning coach, comes from a great lineage of offensive minds in the Andy Reid tree, brings his team back from whatever it was, 3-8, 3-7 to a 9-8 divisional win with an offensive mind than with his quarterback. Who do you like better? Who are you taking? Who's the better coach right now out of these two?
Ryan, it's Doug Peterson. With all, I love Staley. I know you do as well. I won't speak on your behalf. You will probably disagree with me on this point. But you cannot overlook the fact that Doug Peterson is one of only a handful of active coaches that has won a Super Bowl, that has gone all the way. And let's not forget the team that Doug Peterson was inheriting. This team last year won 2 games, was embroiled in the Urban Meyer saga, was basically the laughingstock of the NFL. And now in 12 short months has gone from the league's doormat to a division champion in a matter of 12 months. Cannot overstate the impact that Doug Peterson has had, both schematically as well as culturally, on the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think Staley is one of the bright, young star coaches in this league. Obviously, 9 wins his rookie year, got it to 10 this year. But when you just look at the overall resume, as well as the year-over-year jump to present day, I think for me, it's pretty clear it's Doug Peterson.
Yeah, it's it pains me, but I agree with you. I mean, and that's no shade or anything. I still this day do not understand why Doug disagreement from upper management, and obviously they got their guy now, Nick Sirianni, so they made another good decision there. But I think Doug Peterson's a phenomenal coach. I mean, anytime you win a Super Bowl, and this is no disrespect to Nick Foles, but you win a Super Bowl against the GOAT with your backup quarterback, that says something about your coaching. So, but what I will say is I would say it's closer than probably most people think. I know Brandon Staley's such a polarizing coach without being polarizing. Like, the dude's a respectful guy. He's a great defensive mind. His players love him. He's, puts in the work. It's not like he's like anything bad, but he's polarizing that like some people just absolutely hate him as a coach and don't want to see him. And some people absolutely love him and think he's one of the bright young minds. So I'm obviously on the latter. I think it's closer than what a lot of people would say. I think obviously he needs to clean up some of the decision-making, but I also think, and this obviously falls on him, Jamal, as the head coach, but offensive-minded head coaches, in my opinion, get much longer leashes and bags of excuses than defensive-minded coaches. If you're a defensive coach and you coach a clinic on the defensive side of the ball and you still either lose or you win 17-14 or 10-7, usually the head coach, even if his defense, gets blamed for the offense being bad. If you're an offensive-minded coach and you win 42-38, you get praised for a masterclass at coaching offense and how fun that offensive game plan was. And no one even thinks about how the defense gave up 38 points. So I think that narrative hurts Staley and hurts defensive coaches in general. Now, that being said, as the head coach, you need to figure out how to get the offensive play caller to elevate your offense. And obviously that'll be a big conversation after the season, which we're not going to have right now because we have a game to focus on. So I think it's close, but I would lean Doug Peterson as well for now.
Yeah, Ryan. And I think that's a really excellent point that you made between offensive-minded and defensive-minded coaches. And I think it just also speaks to the era that we're in the NFL today, where the offenses and the rule changes and just the emphasis in terms of schematics, the offenses are just so far ahead of the defenses right now, where there's sort of an acknowledgement that you have to kind of be able to score some amount of points in a playoff run to really get to where you want to go. You really need elite play at the quarterback position. The days of the 85 Bears and the Giants of the 80s and the Ravens of the 2000s and the Giants of the late 2000s, early 2010s, and the Steel Curtain and all of these great defenses, that Tampa Bay great defense with Monty Kiffin in the late 90s. It's hard to see those dominant defenses anymore because the definition of dominant defense today is a team that's giving up 15 to 17 points a game and on any given night could give up 23. So I think that there's sort of an acknowledgement by general managers, by fans, by media, that there is just a much greater margin for error offensively than there is defensively. You almost have to play a perfect game defensively in today's NFL, and you'll still give up 17 points just by the nature of even how good the kickers are today. And 55-yard kicks are routine. So I think the offensive coaches get more rope because I think there's more upside strategically to win big playoff games and potentially win a Super Bowl with offense than there is defense. Unfortunately, Staley's on that wrong side of the argument given where his background is, but I completely agree with you. I think Staley is one of the bright, young, great coaches in this league. And it's interesting. I think just this fourth in Staley, how he came on so brash last year, I think it just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And he's still kind of dealing with damage control of that brand from his very first few games as a coach. Even though he's a great mind, he's a very articulate person, he's a great leader of men, he's very honorable, all of the things that you want in a head coach. But it's so interesting. It goes to show you that first impressions really matter and first impressions really last, and they're hard to deviate from. And Staley's a great example of that.
Yeah, it's wild to me. But, the way you shut that up is you go on a deep playoff run. So if he wins this game, wins another, if they can ride this out, then they'll shut those people up most likely, or at least for a few weeks, at least for the offseason. So, all right, well, we're up against the clock. Who you got in this one? Jags, Chargers, Saturday night, prime time, 5:15 kickoff. Who are you taking?
Ryan, this is a really interesting game, and I like to sort of allude it. I remember, I'm going to give a little bit of an analogy here. I remember when LeBron was kind of coming up in the NBA, and he was losing to Tim Duncan, and he was losing to the Boston Celtics with Garnett and Pierce, and he couldn't meet Kobe in the finals. And, he got to kind of the 2012 finals finally in his career. And Chris Broussard of ESPN said one thing. He said, this is the first time in his career that he's playing a contemporary or someone younger than him. And he'll be damned if someone jumps him in line. It's one thing to lose to the OGs, to the older veterans as you're growing up. But if you're really going to be the man, this is really going to be your era. You can't have someone your age or younger than you cut you in line in terms of big moments or rings or significant hardware. And I feel very similarly about Justin Herbert. I think we kind of give him a pass. Yeah, it's okay if he loses to Mahomes or if he loses to a Brady, even to a Josh Allen to a certain extent. It's okay because those guys are a little bit farther ahead of him in age and hardware and have come from a slightly previous era. But Trevor Lawrence, like you mentioned, is basically a younger version of him. And if Trevor Lawrence finds a way to win this game, he will definitively cut Justin Herbert in line in terms of how we think about the top quarterbacks in the NFL today. And I just don't think Herbert's going to allow that to happen. It's going to be a very compelling game. It's going to come down to a few big plays. I think the margin for error is going to be very small. And I think the margin for victory is going to be very small. But I see Herbert really as a defining moment in his career, early in his career, not allowing Trevor Lawrence to cut him in line. Chargers 23-20 in Jacksonville, and a great one.
Love it. What a great analogy. And it's so true in all sports and definitely fitting in this matchup in this sport. I won't add too much to it because I agree with you. I just think Herbert, everything he's had to go through this year, I think he gets it done. I think, like we just said, I think overall Doug Peterson right now is the better coach, but I think Staley knows what he's up against. And with the chatter out there, like it or love it, the chatter that if they don't make a deep run or lose this game, he may be out. And I don't personally believe that. Now, if they lose 50-7, that's a different story. But if they lose in a close one, I really can't see a coach that led his team as injury riddled to the playoffs for the first time in almost 6 years getting fired, especially with the way this organization runs. I can't see that happening. But you hear those things. No matter what people say, they deny it, you hear those things. And so I think he's going to really coach a masterful game and a masterful defensive game. And I agree, it's going to be a lower scoring. It's going to be close. I will go 20-16, 4-point victory. You went 3-point victory, both very close. But 2016, 23-20, either way, the Bolts move on. And that would be a great start to the weekend for LA football. That's all the time we have here on the LA Football Show on the Mightier 1090. We'll be back at the break. If you're on podcast, thanks so much. Enjoy the game. Again, Bolt fam, wherever you're going, hit us up. Text Bolts to 31032 or Ryan Dyer to LAFB or LAFB Jams. Let us know where you're watching the game. We'd love to come say what up. But everyone enjoy. Go Chargers. Talk to you all soon.
You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.